Putting the different steps of the music creation journey into words is not exactly easy, but when it comes time to sew the interdependent elements, gluing them together into a harmonious blend, otherwise known as mixing, this is arguably the most widely covered and perhaps the most confusing part of the creation process. The more videos you watch about nailing that perfect mix or a specific technique, the more you might walk away even more confused and overwhelmed than when you started. The problem is that mixing music is technical and also creative, and once you get to a certain point in the process, personal taste and style takes over and you make your own box of tools. It's easy these days to get caught up in a sea of endless software options, dogmatic opinions on what is correct, which DAW or EQ plugin is best, etc. And you can spend way too much time overthinking everything. However, in all honesty, if your writing and arranging has been well taken care of beforehand, then mixing should not be the mountain to overcome, but rather the fun slope to enjoy riding down. So this video is not about watching me carry out my own idiosyncratic process from start to finish, using exotic plugins and minutiae that may be confusing to newcomers. Rather, this video is all about the beginning, where I'll show steps that I believe can help anyone kick off a mix in a good place and get you to a comfortable middle, where you can then start experimenting and carve out your own path. Or at that point, the more technical videos out there will make more sense for you. While I am working in Logic Pro and I cover key commands and stuff for that specific DAW, the info in here is helpful for anyone having a tough time getting started with their mix. So with that, we'll get started. So in this first part, I'm just going to do some really basic mix prep. So if you've done something like this before, in Logic Pro especially, then feel free to skip ahead. Here we have one of my songs ready to mix. And quickly, first we're going to go through some visual mix prep. To start, we have all of our tracks colorized by instrument group. However, when you open the mixer by hitting X, you'll see that all of our tracks, all of our mixer channels are gray. If you saw my Logic 101 video, then you have already done this step, but let's quickly enable complete features. This is the only time I'm going to backtrack and re-explain some information. So if you haven't seen Logic Pro 11, a complete tutorial for the overwhelmed beginner, then please go watch that now. Anyways, we just go to Logic Pro settings up here and click on Advanced. And here we can enable complete features. And as you notice, now all of our tracks in the mixer window are colorized. What we can also do is up here in the top right, it says simplified mode. We can click on that and enable complete features this way, which is easier. This should really be on by default. I guess it's for people coming from GarageBand or something. I don't know. And now also under settings, if we click on General and then the sub-menu of Editing, we should make sure that all of these features are enabled. This is in regards to how our pointer tool reacts in the arrangement window or the main window. See how it's scrolling down and it's turning into a marquee tool where I can select a point of playback, down slow, from even as well as split regions, select regions, etc. I just want to make sure that everything next to pointer tool, all of these three. To colorize your tracks, simply select the region you want to colorize and hit Option C. And that opens the palette window and you can choose from there. To add that color to your mixer channel, go to Functions and click on Color Track by Region Cell Color. And then that changed it in the mixer window. So we've got vocals in different shades of green. We have guitars in different shades of purple, the bass and the sub-bass in blue, acoustic guitars in orange, and my drum MIDI region is in brown. I'm using Superior Drummer, so that's a virtual instrument, and all of these tracks that I have selected here are related to Superior Drummer. So of course, all the faders are set to 0 to start off with. And the next step is to go through each individual audio track and my virtual instrument tracks and do a quick check of the incoming gain level to each track. And then we'll set our general panning as well. So I know that I want my acoustic guitars panned hard left and right. My heavy guitars are also going to be panned that way. And I took care of the panning for the drums inside of Superior Drummer because it has its own mixing window where you can do that in here. Now, as far as gain goes, if an audio file is recorded too low, then we can clip gain the audio file. Everything in this session is already leveled pretty well, but suppose I recorded this acoustic guitar too low. What I do is I put a level meter on the mixer channel, switch to peak and RMS, and let's just pretend that this acoustic guitar was recorded way too low. So I click on my inspector window here, or just hit I, and I can bring my gain down like that. And I'm looking for an RMS around -24 to -18, and a peak around -12 to -6. This is a rough ballpark of where you want to be. But I really wouldn't go any higher than a -3 for a peak. This is not just so that you can hear the track better in the mix, but it will also make it easier to properly gain stage when it comes time to adding plugin processing later on. More on that later, but real quick, standardized gain level going into the channel makes it a lot easier to experiment with plugin presets. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of people out there on forums or wherever who think that you're stupid for using presets, but they're a good starting place, and Logic has plenty of them to get you going. And if your gain is a healthy level going into these compressors or whatever, then all you have to do is make a few adjustments, and you can have the sound that you're going after or expecting to hear. But more on that later. Next, if you have some audio left over from the arranging and general production phase of your song that you just don't know if you'll need, but you can't bring yourself to delete it just yet, maybe you spent a long time recording it, or you think it's a good idea, but you're just not sure if it's right for the song, then I encourage you to do what I did here and just visually mute it for now. So down here, I got some background vocals that I'm not sure if I'm really going to use. And what I do is I just hit Control M to mute or unmute them while they're selected. This way you can come back later on in your mix and really decide if it stays or goes. Then if there's some DI tracks or something that you might want for parallel processing, but again, you're just not sure about yet, then you can hide these tracks to declutter your workspace. So I've got some acoustic guitar DIs that I might actually add some distortion to. And if I hit H, then that brings up the option to hide stuff on our track header. And if I select that H, then it turns green, and then I hit H again, and they're hidden. Just make sure that they're muted, because otherwise they will be playing in the background. So we don't want that. Now let's take a minute to route our instrument groups to their own outputs or buses before they hit the stereo out. So I'll bring up my mixer again, and I did already do this, so I'm going to undo it just to show you what I did. Oh, and just so you know, I'm not going to be using things like folder stacks or track stacks or whatever they're called. This is how I mix. I always have everything in view, aside from the hidden tracks that I've already talked about. But there's features in Logic where you can basically put certain track groups into a folder, and then they just drop down. I don't like doing that. No shade if you do. This is just the way I mix. All right, so I'm going to select all of my drum tracks and send those out to bus 5. And doing so automatically created that bus in my mixer window. And then I can just drag it in the mixer window to where I want it. And I'm just going to call this drums. Then I'm going to send my snare top and bottom mic to their own output, call that snares, and send that to bus 5. This is because I may want to process the snare top and bottom mic together. Then my drum bus is actually going to be sent to bus 30, and I'm going to treat bus 30 as my stereo output, or my mix bus. So everything is going to go to bus 30 before it goes to the general stereo out. I want to leave Logic's designated stereo out clean, just in case I have a guide track or 2 or 3 guide tracks, meaning a commercial track that I have inside of my session that I can use to A/B my mix against. If I have a lot of processing on my mix bus, then I could even set up a few of these buses before hitting the stereo out. So bus 30 could go to bus 31, etc. The reason I might do that is because I'm not sure if Logic has addressed this issue. I can't find any writing about it, but in the past, if you had too many plugins on one track, then they would all be processed on one CPU core. Anecdotally, this seems to sometimes work and sometimes not work, so take or leave this little piece of advice depending on your results. So I'm going to set up different group buses for the guitars and the vocals as well, and so I'll do that and I'll be right back. All right, so I set up a few more buses. And now we can start moving faders, but if we just hit play and play the whole song,
there's no need trying to unfold. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday, but 2 days back to back.
Then it might sound a little daunting. And we got some nasty clipping going on the stereo bus. Lots of nasty stuff happening. So we could take all of our faders just down to like -8 or something like that. And that would take care of the clipping problems. And while it's great to listen to all of the instruments together as much as possible while mixing, I want to get a little bit more in depth inside each group first. So right now I'm going to do a little sub mix in each group. More specifically, a fader mix, since we're not doing any EQing or compressing or anything like that at this point. I usually start with the drums because you can get the peak levels sorted early on. So expanding on that, I'm going to put a level meter on my drum out, and I'll get a blend of the different drums to sit well on their own inside of the kit. The goal here is quick and instinctual because some of these levels will change and be automated once our mix is really going. I'm going to go to the loudest part of the song, which is usually the chorus, and I'm just going to loop this section up, and here we go. Now you'll notice on my far room mics right here, there's 2 of them, and if I right-click on the pan knob, I can choose stereo pan. So you can move the entire signal left or right. I choose this on a stereo source because if I chose balance, then that would actually lower the volume of one of the microphones. So choosing stereo pan just moves that entire image left or right. And now if I check my peak levels, that looks fine for now. Like I said, right now, I want to keep my peak levels around -6, so that will give me 6 decibels of headroom before digitally clipping the mix bus. Some people do that intentionally, but there's better tools for that, and that is not the topic of this video. So I'm going to do the same thing that I just did on my drums for all of the other instrument groups, and I will be right back. All right, so I've finished my fader rides, and right now I just want to focus in on these electric guitars for a minute, because sometimes you need to kind of skip ahead and automate a few things that just really obviously need it. So let's solo these. And as you can hear, there's kind of this feedback before the chords actually start playing. And that's actually an EBow, but anyways. Now I want this low in the mix and kind of ramp up into where the chorus starts. So I'll just hit A to open up my automation. And if you hit read down here, then you can see that I've drawn in some volume automation. And to do that, it's really easy. Just click wherever and drag it around. Undo that. And now
there's no need trying to unfold. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday, but
it's not super loud coming into the chorus. And I know that's very basic for a lot of people. I just wanted to point it out. So everything else is static right now, meaning there's no automation. And let me just get a level meter on my stereo out. And if I hit play,
2 days back to back, more than enough to break any progress.
you can see that I'm not clipping on the master. I am close, but I'm not clipping. And my RMS level is looking good. And I can pretty much make out every instrument that's playing, albeit in a dull, sort of muddy state right now. But everything's at a level where I can get in there and do a proper mix. And again, this is the loudest part of the song. That's usually where I would start. So from here on out, I'm going to be placing my output in mono and toggling between that and stereo. This is how a lot of people get levels. This is how I learned how to do it. But you don't have to. You can stay in stereo if you want. Regardless, if you can hear everything gelling together in mono, then there's a good chance that you'll hear it fine in other formats. It's a good way to really judge your levels. If you don't have a stereo to mono toggle button on your interface, then you can just pull up a gain plugin inside of Logic and you can turn mono on and off this way. Okay, so now we're in a good place to start thinking about EQ and compression. However, at this stage, I'm focusing on clearing things up, removing tubbiness or bloat, muddiness, cloudy clutter, and some general harshness depending on the source. So subtractive EQ is the majority of what we're going to be focusing on right now. There is going to be some light boosting at this step for me, if only to serve as a reminder of the frequencies that I may want to push into a compressor or boost after a compressor. So I'm not going to be boosting too much right now. So tubby flab would describe the beginning of the frequency spectrum up until around 150 hertz or so. Muddiness could be from 100 to about 200, 220. Boominess could be from 200 to around 300. Boxiness from 300 to 500, 520, 550 or so. And then you can run into something like cloudiness or bark from 500 to about 1K, depending. Too much nose or telephone quality can be from around 900 to 2K. Then harshness can start even as low as around 1500 up until about 4 or 5K. And then from 5K and upwards, you'll be dealing with sibilance and sources that are too bright or thin or papery, stuff like that. Now, this is all source dependent, and we will not be cutting from every area that I just described on every source. It just takes listening experience and time to know when or when not to cut something. However, aside from your kick drum and your bass guitar or bass synth, you will most likely be cutting the low end out of most or all of your other sources using a high pass filter or at the very least a low shelf. You'll want to check in on your listening volume at times, so you can get a free decibel meter on your phone. And if you're in a normal size residential room, then usually around 74, 75 decibels is a good average. Some people go higher. I just find it too loud. And once you become acclimated to working at that level, you won't really need a decibel meter anymore. But when you're just getting started mixing, you might just start cranking things up too loud. And then not only does that damage your hearing over time, but you'll also just be hearing things in the wrong way. I mean, cranking it up for a few seconds here and there is fine if you need a jolt or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with my vocals. So I have my main vocal right here, and then next to it, I have its double, which is a few decibels lower in the chorus. And then I have my background vocals in dark green. I've got the stock Logic EQ on the vocal out, or the vocal bus, and I'm going to put it into high quality mode. The stock parametric EQ in Logic is a little dated, so I recommend always using it in high quality mode. If you don't, then you get something called cramping in the upper frequencies. And to make a long story short, I'll just visually show you what cramping looks like. When something cramps, you're not going to be getting a symmetrical curve near the Nyquist frequency, and I'm not really going to get into what that means right now either, but this is what it looks like. So you can see this side of the bell is fine, and then over here, this is what cramping looks like. Put it back in high quality mode, and you have a symmetrical curve. So moving on from that, I'm just going to put the same EQ on my background vocals. And if you don't know, you can just click on the plugin and drag it by holding Alt over to another channel strip, and it will copy it. And I'll do a quick pass on these, add some compression, some de-essing, and then I'll explain the process. Okay, so I got my vocals into a decent starting place. What we're looking at here is the lead vocal. So I have all these effects on the vocal bus. Then I put a de-esser second, and then some compression. So listening back and forth between the whole track and the soloed groups, I basically just removed all the flab from below 100 hertz.
Fold. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday. Fold. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday. But
and then play it back in with the whole track.
Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday. But 2 days back to back. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday. But 2 days back to back, more than enough to break.
And then get it into a spot where I don't really notice that low end gone missing. So on the de-esser, this setting is pretty standard for my voice. However, sometimes I go all the way down to like 4.8K, and sometimes I end up using a couple de-essers, with one maybe taking care of issues between 2 to 3K and another in the top end somewhere else. But if I'm doing that, then I use plugins with more control. The Acoustica Audio Fire the DS is currently my favorite because you can get really specific with it and it sounds really good. However, I don't want to overcomplicate things today, so what I have here is a good compromise. Then we have Logic's compressor, which is just taming the vocals a little bit. I have a Warm Audio WA76 that I use to track my voice with. So the vocals are already compressed as they're being recorded, but using this one as well not only creates more consistent level, but it also kind of marries the EQ that I used to my vocal a little bit better, which is one reason why it's after the EQ.
Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday.
Then I made some similar moves on the background vocals, but I'm also hitting its compressor a little bit harder.
2 days back to back, more than enough to break. 2 days back to back, more than enough to break.
And I cut some of the mid-range out just so that it doesn't interfere. Now, I did mention that Logic's EQ is kind of bare bones. It's not outfitted as well as many modern parametric EQs. Parametric meaning this style, where you can visually see the whole frequency spectrum, and you have fine control over where the frequency point is, and the width of the band is pretty free. However, there are some great free alternatives out there, and I recommend the Tokyo Dawn Labs Nova EQ as far as free plugins go. Let's pull that up. So it's got a nice resizable GUI like this. So not only is it a static EQ where you can just set it and leave it, but you also have the option to do dynamic EQing, which allows for basic compression on that EQ band. So you just click threshold down here, and then you can set where you want it to kick in. And then you have your regular compression controls like ratio, attack, and release. So I will be making use of that. And now I'm going to get the mix into a presentable spot, which should take about a half an hour. And then we'll come back and kind of reverse engineer it. Okay, so I finished my draft, but it's not useful information to walk through every little thing I did. I'll just focus on some highlights because each little move is obviously source dependent. However, I did stick to the tools that I already mentioned, aside from the bass guitar and a couple of others which I will address. Now, like I said, the drums I used Superior Drummer 3, so these are obviously samples. However, they're dry, unaffected samples for the most part, pretty much recording from microphone to preamp to recorder, minus some tasteful outboard gear here and there. So you can pretty much process them in the same way that you would an acoustic set like I have here, shaping the attack characteristics with compression and removing frequencies with EQ, stuff like that. You just might not want to push them as hard as you would an acoustic set that you record yourself, because by nature, they're not going to be as dynamic. And since we're focusing on clearing things up right now, let's focus in on the ride cymbal. So as an example, you can hear that there's a lot of low-end information and a lot of 350 to 400 that is just taking up too much room. So let's get that ride up there. Yeah, leaving that in there would have just filled the frequency spectrum up too much and clouded things like the acoustic guitar. So you'll notice that there's nothing like parallel compression or artificial reverbs. There's no processing on the drum bus either. We're just doing what's absolutely necessary at this point, not following some kind of muscle memory or routine that I have for its own sake. Over here we have the acoustics. And I'm just notching out some strong frequencies, removing the low end and some mid-range that interferes with the bass guitar. And then speaking of the bass, I used an amp modeler on the DI. So as you can hear, that really livens it up and brightens it up a lot. I really wanted to make that bass brighter, so I'm using this Ampeg plugin for that. So then I have another Logic plugin called Glow, and I used this a few different times, but here it is on the bass. It's really worth reading up on Glow if you haven't already. The different models can not only provide a pleasant distortion or a subtle harmonic saturation, added harmonic content to the original signal. And it can also mimic tape machines, as well as add some compression. So that's why I used it on the bass on this squeeze setting to kind of squeeze it a little bit. If you're on headphones or studio monitors, then you can hear that it kind of brings the bass forward a little bit. And you'll see that I have it wrapped in level meters before and after. And these allow me to listen to the sound objectively. So as you can see, the level that I have going into the Glow is pretty much the same as what's coming out of it. It's even a little bit quieter coming out. Usually a plugin like this is going to pump up the volume quite a bit. So what you want to do is you want to take the output level and just pull that down until it matches the input level. This way you're not fooling yourself into thinking that this plugin is automatically making the sound better because it's louder. Glow is on par with many of the third-party paid-for saturation or distortion plugins on the market, so I use it a lot. Next to my DI bass, I have a sub bass as well. And I only wanted that to come in on the choruses, so I have it automated with volume automation. And then I actually automated the Glow as well. I didn't need it in the verse, so it just gets mixed in the chorus at 18%. I don't need to use much. So walking through this automation menu, you just hit A to access automation, and then I can click in here and I locate my Chroma Glow in this menu. And then here are the different parameters inside of Chroma Glow. And then I scroll down to mix, click that, and that's where I got this from. Now you'll notice that I have my other plugins in here as well, even the Ampeg, which is a third party, and that has its parameters here as well. So yeah, you can go pretty deep as to how much you want to automate things. Next to the bass sub, I have my general bass output, combining both of them, and I have the Nova plugin on that, and this is doing basic sidechain duty, where every time the kick drum hits, the bass guitar and the bass sub are lowered in volume a little bit. Now, in order to do that, since I'm using a sample instrument for my kick drum, I need to bounce down to an audio file because I can't set the sidechain input to a multi-output virtual instrument. All I can get is the piece of that instrument that's on the actual MIDI track. In this case, it's the hi-hat, so there's no need for that. So what I do is I just go to my kick drum, and then I set my locators from the beginning of the song until the end of the song, and then you can just hit Command E, and then I can just export my kick drum from my session, and then from wherever I exported it to, I can just drop it back into my project. And then I right click on it and just say move to recorded position, and that moves it right to where I want it to be. And then I can just lower that in volume all the way down to 0. And now on the Nova plugin, I can choose kick for sidechain, which is that audio file. And that's how you do it. And that just helps keep the low end tighter so that you can hear the kick poke through a little bit better. Anyways, the settings that you use are going to be completely kick drum dependent. Some don't have a point as high as 70 hertz. Some of them are at like 60 or 50. It really depends. So I kind of followed that train of thought throughout the rest of the tracks, really focusing on subtractive EQ for now and just a little boost where I need it. Something else to point out, I really put Glow to work on the general guitar bus. Guitars love as much analog flavor you can throw at them, so I used 2 instances of Glow here. One with an analog preamp setting, and then the next one after it with the magnetic or tape characteristic setting. They're both applying some light compression, and the analog preamp is providing some nice color, and then the magnetic is providing its own kind of color. And then this is a good time to add some gentle mix bus EQ. The use of anything on the mix bus is always your preference, but a lot of people, including me, use EQ and often compression. So after you've taken care of a lot of the mud on the individual tracks, you can add EQ on the stereo bus like I am now, or you could leave it on from the beginning and just toggle it on and off here and there to see how it's affecting things. I find that conservative boosts down low and up high in the frequency spectrum can keep you from overcooking your individual tracks. And it might look like I'm adding a lot at 59 hertz, but these sliders all interact with each other, so it only ends up being around like a decibel or so. And speaking of overcooking your individual sources, you could say that adding mix bus compression can keep you from doing that, but I tend to lean away from it until I know I want it for the song. There's a lot of differing opinions out there. I don't always use mix bus compression, but I know many people do. Again, this is a subjective thing, and there's no hard and fast rules for it.
Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday, but 2 days back to back, more than enough to break bones. Tonight we felt invincible enough on Friday, but 2 days back to back, more than enough to break.
As far as the actual stereo out and the master volume control, which is really what the master is, I would just leave them at 0. There's really no reason to change these. Anyways, we did general pans, we did a fader mix, submixing, routing, general EQ, compression, some harmonic distortion, and just a good overall working balance in our chorus. So the next step would be to move to the verse and make sure that we're all good there, and any other part of the song where the balance might be a little off, maybe in the bridge or the middle 8. Any part that has different dynamics than the chorus now need attention. So ultimately, we just took care of our legwork. We have set a nice foundation that we can build upon in pretty much any way we want from here. I can trade out this EQ that I have on my mix bus with some of my favorite third-party plugins, and the same goes for the general EQing. So you'll notice that I haven't touched a reverb, chorus, delay, clipper, or even a channel strip. This leads me back to what I said at the beginning of the video. From this point on, personal style, taste, fads, trends, that all comes into play. You can even experiment and start trading out these stock Logic plugins for more CPU-intensive and, dare I say, better sounding EQs and compressors that are available on the market. It's too easy these days to just start slapping plugins on your music without really laying a strong foundation first, but hopefully I have laid out a path that you can take to be in a position to really go in any direction that you want from here. If this video has helped you, then please remember to like it, subscribe to Como Music Creation, and a donation on Buy Me a Coffee would always be awesome. It's more difficult now than it has ever been to get paid anything on YouTube, so even the smallest contribution would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Now, the use of send effects like reverb is not a topic for today's video, but I'm sure that you will be using them in your productions. So I feel like a good place to end for today is to provide a brief explanation of one of Logic's features that may be confusing at first glance. Let's say I have my acoustic guitar panned hard left like I do here, and let's set up a room reverb. Let's drag that over here. So now, of course, I'm only hearing that reverb out of the left channel. So what I could do is I could set it to pre-fader. And now it's in stereo at least. But what if I want the dry acoustic to be on the left and the room reverb to be on the right? Well, I could just pan it like that, but what if I have a bunch of other instruments sent to this reverb and I don't want them panned all the way to the right? So now what we have to do is activate sends on faders. Next, we click on the send that the acoustic guitar track has, and we click on independent pan. From there, we can use the pan knob to control where we're sending this reverb, to the left or the right. And voila, we did it. This is a feature that was bootstrapped into Logic kind of late in the program's life, so that's why it's a bit messy, but it works nonetheless. And if I was new to Logic Pro, then I would definitely need this explained to me. So that's why I have included it in this mix tutorial.